Hello and welcome to the second event in our series of professional skills masterclasses. Today, we're going to be focusing on how you can apply a startup mentality in your organisation. Whether you're part of a team or leading one, we'll be exploring the many benefits and steps you can take to apply that crucial entrepreneurial mindset in your organisation. I'm Chris Sims, I'm Managing Director of Commercial and Marketing here at BT. And as part of BT's Skill for Tomorrow programme, we've been helping thousands of people and organisations to develop their digital confidence and develop their professional skills. And of course, now more than ever, due to COVID-19, these skills are critical for people and organisations to survive and eventually thrive. Before we get started, just a couple of notes on housekeeping. So firstly, throughout the event, you can pause and play the stream as you please. And secondly, we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. So we have a live Q&A area where you can post your questions, and I'll be putting those to our panel of experts throughout the show. So, why is having a startup mentality so important? Well, as we all know, this last year has been a real test of organisations' ability to be flexible and agile. And according to a Deloitte survey, only 21% of leaders in large organisations felt completely confident that their organisations could adapt to changing circumstances. And clearly, having an entrepreneurial mindset throughout is more important than ever. So that's why today I'm really happy to introduce you to our two special guests. We're joined by best-selling author and Coffee Republic co-founder Sahar Hashemi and Andrew Ward, our very own Director of Culture and Leadership at BT. So, Sahar, you've got some really practical tips for our audience today, and I know it's a really big question, but how do we get that entrepreneurial mindset?
It is a big question, but something kind of deeply personal to me, because I started Coffee Republic very much kitchen table. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, but what happened to me was I went to New York and I fell in love with skinny lattes I'd seen in New York. And I never thought this was a business idea. I just wanted to drink skinny lattes back at home when I got back to London. And I just remember saying to my brother, I wish someone would bring those American-style coffee bars. And he said, well, this is a great business idea. We should do it. And I said, why should we do it? We're just the customers. You know, why doesn't someone else go and open coffee bars and I'll go to them as a customer? And I couldn't quite understand really why I had to kind of almost, it was an unmet need. Why I had to sort of fix something for something I needed myself as a customer. I thought other people did that really. But then my brother persuaded me to actually follow the kind of nose of the customer. And it was really through that we ended up opening the UK's first coffee bar chain and growing it from zero, from my kitchen table to 110. Really only looking at the business through the eyes of a customer. We were clueless. We had no idea about coffee, catering, retail. And I always thought, us not knowing would be a huge disadvantage, but actually it was the best thing for us, because that's why a lot of people in the coffee business had never, started these new style coffee bars, because their mind was contaminated by this is how we always do things. So, in our cluelessness, we started this company. We didn't have, we did it on real bootstrapping, real basics. We got a 90 grand bank loan, which didn't take us very far. But like that, every time we tried something, we didn't have much money, so we had to use every resource we had to the maximum and, get things done somehow by hook or by crook, or what they call hustling, which is what a lot of entrepreneurs do. And then suddenly the company grew. We grew to 110 in 5 years. And next thing you know, we've left the startup status and we've become a corporate, almost a big company. We had thousands of employees. And suddenly I could see the culture changing. The culture changed away from the startup mentality. And we were a big company. We were attracting people from other big companies to come. I remember we were so excited when we got someone to come and join us as a director from a very big coffee company. And as soon as he joined, I was so excited that, my God, he's going to bring in all the experience, and, big coffee companies know how to do this. We've been so kitchen table. I can't wait to learn from him. But of course, Chris, as soon as he arrived, all he could tell us was how you couldn't do something and how in that company they tried it didn't work. And it's almost like he brought all this experience, and with the experience we almost became prisoners of what had worked before. We were no longer clueless. We no longer had an open mind. And, people were throwing money at us, and the more money we had, the less resourceful we got, So instead of like trying to do things tiny, we were trying to do them big, and then the sort of whole fear set in, and the whole focus changed. I remember this one guy that we did hire, let's call him John. I remember every day he would come in, and I would see actually he'd come into the office with a cup of Costa coffee. And well, it was normal back then for us to go and look at our competitors. So I thought maybe he's looking to see what Costa's doing. So it's quite natural. But I noticed there was about 10 days that he was coming in every day with Costa. So I went in and said, listen, John, what is going on at Costa? Maybe I should come with you because you're going there every day to look at what they're doing. And he said, no, Sahar, actually, it's not that. It's just that we've been so busy in the head office that I haven't even had time. I just go and get my coffee from Costa. I haven't had time to go to a Coffee Republic. So I said, so when did you last go and actually get a coffee and drink it from Coffee Republic? And he said, oh, well, we've been so busy. It's been about 10 days. And 10 days. And I was like, oh my God, I was about to call the police, really, the entrepreneurial police, because I couldn't understand how you could not be in where our customers are, where is the DNA, the core of our business. And really that's what I learned is the critical, what people often forget about what real agile entrepreneurial culture is. It's all about really being in your customer's shoes, being out there, seeing what the problems are. Because, we talk about innovation, innovation and disruption are really fancy words. But all innovation is just finding a solution to a problem. And the problem is not a problem your company's got. It's not a problem in your market share. It's a problem your customers got. And how are you going to find out what problem your customers got? It's not by sitting there reading a market research report. It's about going out there and seeing it in real life, in real time, really feeling for yourself what the problem is. With your heart, you're human to human, seeing what the customer or what the end user's problem is. So that's really what I've learned is the essence is actually putting yourself in your customer and your end user's shoes. And, it's more than just about customer service. It's about, giving purpose to the whole organization is that every day you go into work, there's a purpose. You're making a difference for someone at the end.
It's an amazing story. And I think what really resonates with me is how in the early days, that cluelessness was an advantage, and you kind of just lost that as you were approaching scale. And if you were to look back and sort of highlight the 2 or 3 things that you would really try and avoid, what would they be?
It's a great question because I've actually thought about, what did we, when we got big, what didn't we do? And so I've got like the one do is, get into your customers' shoes, look at your business from a customer point of view. But that is 3 don'ts. There are 3 things that are barriers, I think, in large companies of getting people to be entrepreneurial. So the first barrier is don't be too busy. So a bit like the guy we hired from a big company, he was too busy to go out there drinking our own coffee. He was too busy in the head office. And that, it's when your focus becomes so internal and you forget the world out there where all the great ideas are. It's the world of your customer. So it's in a way getting rid of the bureaucracy and the processes and the systems. You need them, of course. You're not a kitchen table startup in a big company. You need them, but where's the balance? To what extent is that process serving its purpose, or is it just there for the sake of it? Because if it's there just for the sake of it, all it's going to do is pour cold water over anyone's passion or sense of purpose. And bureaucracy is never going to come up with great ideas on innovation, is it? It's just the process and stop things.
It's a barrier to innovation, if anything. Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's my first don't. So make sure, don't be too busy. My second don't is don't be a prisoner of precedent. So by that, I mean, going back to our own story, we were clueless, but, I never realized it was actually our biggest advantage. Because we were clueless, we had an open mind. And often people, think in big companies, instead of being clueless, there's always, this is how we've always done it. It's not industry practice. Someone tried it, it doesn't work. And as soon as someone says that in the big company, everyone else just shuts off. You get scared, you get intimidated. It's got quite a bit of gravitas saying that sort of thing. You're like, oh, sorry, I mentioned it. You're right, we know better. Whereas, actually experience means nothing, especially as the world's just changed on its axis sort of in this last year. So everyone's got to be out, when you're out there in the customer's world, you've got to have an open mind. You've got to forget about the industry standpoint, because the industry standpoint is never the customer standpoint. So you've got to have an open mind, so you really look to see what's going on, look to see what's missing. what can be done, what's next. And ideas will come to you when you're out there, and you've got an open mind, ideas come.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in my experience, this is really hard in large organisations, because some of it, as you say, is a mindset thing. But also in large organisations, you've got legacy systems and processes and lots of legacy thing that almost prevents you doing it. It's almost, you have to concentrate on breaking out the shackles of the past in order to be innovative in the future.
Absolutely, and I think that's why you've got to be really careful about bureaucracy and the whole rule creep that comes in. Simplify things and be careful about the language. I always almost say, have a swear jar when someone says this is how we've always done it. Actually, money in the swear jar, because that's the only way to change the tone and change the language and be really aware of the kind of culture that's there. And now my third one is kind of going on to that is kind of don't let fear stop you. Don't let fear be an option. And people always think, oh, fear, actually, we don't have fear in our company, where there's actually tremendous amounts of fear in large corporations. And fear disguises itself. It's got many different faces. One of the main faces of fear, I think, is perfectionism. People don't do things because they say, oh, you don't understand, we've got a great reputation, and we can't do it unless it's really great, because that's our reputation. But you've got to ask yourself, is that perfectionism really a search for greatness, or is it just an excuse not to do something? And when you see how much of that is there, that sort of that fear of making a mistake, the fear of someone saying no, the fear of it not being perfect, stops people from doing things. And the entrepreneurial solution to that, the way to take the sting out of fear, is do things on a small scale. As an entrepreneur, you have to do it on a small scale because there's nothing else and you've got no resources. So you experiment on a small scale. And as soon as you do things on a small scale, the fear goes away. Whereas if you think about doing something across a whole organization, it's terrifying, of course, huge amounts of money involved. But, little pockets of trying things, a bit of kind of prototyping, see how it works, trial and error, really is how I call it. It's sort of reframing failure into trial and error, I think, is a way. And it's kind of the only way is to switch on creativity and innovation, is to switch off the fear.
Again, and that's another thing that's very hard in large organisations, and certainly see a lot of investment in processes that will encourage innovation, but it is really, really hard. And I'll bring in Andrew now, actually, on the subject of large organisations, because obviously Sahar was involved in building up something from scratch and went through the difficulties of taking it into that mid-market space. We obviously work for a very long-established organisation. But it's just as critical for us in BT and just as critical for any large organisation. So why is entrepreneurial mindset so important in large organisations too?
Well, Chris, I think that's absolutely right. And I probably am that large corporate wonk that you're talking about, having worked in large organisations my entire career. In fact, I was in Seattle in the early 90s and I went to one of the first Starbucks. And I didn't come back and I didn't set up a coffee store. And I've spent probably more than than I would have if I'd invested in a startup on coffee. But what I have done is spent 15, 20 years, the last 15, 20 years in large organisations, all of whom want to be faster, more agile, close to the customer. And these are messages that there are very few organisations haven't got and don't understand. And as you quite rightly say, the last year has made that really, really obvious. What is obvious is the importance of the end customer who pays the bills, and that we've worked very hard to try and build that empathy. So all colleagues, wherever they sit in the organisation, understand the value we as an organisation add to hospitals, to people in care homes, to people working from home. That's really important to connect them to the purpose, as you said. So it's clearly important to get the customer right, the end customer right. And even if you're an internal person, and I play an internal role, it's really important to think of yourself as a product owner or a service provider, as if you're an entrepreneur. And in that context, the product or service you provide has customers. There might be internal customers, there might be end users. But again, put yourself in their shoes. So getting it right for customers is really important. There's obviously cost benefits. You talked about agility and the need to cope, but cost is obviously a real issue right now. So driving through simplicity, trying to do things, find ways to do things cheaper, taking cost out, reflecting on what we've always done and is it still the right thing and is that unnecessary cost, is another really important driver for why we should do this. And the last one I would call out, with my perspective on culture and leadership particularly, is the importance that this has for colleagues and individuals. So a lot of being a startup, a lot of these entrepreneurial mindset is about making work a better place for people to work. more connected to your customer, more sense of meaning, more freedom, more ability to try things and so on. So I think that's also important, and perhaps a bit we forget, that if you can create for your team, for your organization, some sort of sense of connection to customer and ability to make difference, then you'll have happier people, you'll attract talent better.
Actually, if I can say, I very much agree with Andrew. And people talk about purpose nowadays, and it's this whole thing of this new sort of younger generation talk about Gen Z talk about purpose, and people mistake purpose with some grandstanding kind of curing cancer, or saving the world. Whereas I think all purpose is very much, as Andrew says, is that every day you go to work and it has meaning. You're impacting someone, and so this is this connecting people with the end user. So when I use the word customer, a lot of people in big companies are not customer facing, but still even your internal customers, ultimately, the way the company makes money is the end user, and putting everyone's direction towards that, because I think this purpose is a fundamental human need. Everyone, the paycheck's no longer enough to come into work every day. You feel you're part of something bigger and that you're actually impacting someone, and that is hugely important, which just comes back to putting the customer at the center of everyone's world in a way.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that people understand, and it helps guide their behaviours as well. And I think behaviours are really critical in driving an entrepreneurial mindset. And I guess, Andrew, what would you see as the key behaviours, particularly in large organisations, that you see exhibited when people are standout entrepreneurs?
So I think the really important ones, and it doesn't matter whether you are just a colleague, whether you're a manager, whether you're a leader of a large organisation, what really matters is the way you lead and the way you treat people. So you need to give people, yourself, as you talked about, but also the people you're working with and who work for you, permission to take some risks, permission to spend time with customers. Say that's a priority for you. I know you're busy. It's a priority, however, to go and spend time with both the customers and the users of your service. So how you treat your people, what you reward, what you recognise, the things you look to recruit for and promote for, I think that's really important, and all of us can do that. Doesn't matter what our role is. Doesn't matter at all, in fact. And if you set that tone and you demonstrate that in your actions, and again, what leaders do at all levels, what leaders do makes a bigger difference to culture than pretty much anything else. If you set that tone, then I think you get the kind of behaviours we're looking for. If you display bureaucratic, don't do that, don't take risks, don't behaviour, you'll kill an entrepreneurial mindset.
And I can say that from an entrepreneur, because I think when you're an entrepreneur, you're in your kitchen table, and your culture is like a culture of one. You're setting the culture. It's really weird, because as a person, you're setting the culture. But it just shows how important that is, because I do find, your passion, the passion my brother and I had when we started, was almost contagious by osmosis. It passes. And what Andrew's saying is, it's this it's moving to a more human culture in a way, because all this stuff like empathy and going and seeing your customers actually wonderful, because humans do that. It's about human connection rather than following the bureaucracy and waiting to have a kind of meeting with 40 people on it, sort of thing. So it's going back to these real a more human way of doing business, and innovation is going to come from humans ultimately, because no process and no system ever came up with a new idea, right? So
yeah, it is a funny one. In smaller organisations, your influence as an individual is so much greater.
Yeah.
Just being human creates a generally much more innovative culture. I mean, in large organisations, you kind of have to overemphasise it a bit. So, Andrew, what would your tips be to encourage those behaviours in larger organisations?
I think it comes back to what Sahar was saying about purpose. So your role as a leader, at whatever level you are, is to connect people to the why. So why is this important to us to be simpler, faster, bolder, whatever it is that you want to prioritise from that entrepreneurial mindset? Why is that important? And that can be a negative reason. So if we don't do this, we're going to go bust, we're going to lose roles, we're going to lose customers. So it's unfortunate, but it's well proven that negative, avoiding things, is a very powerful motivator. So you need to get on that. Or it can be positive, and ideally it's a balance of the two, right? So we could do this. We could bring coffee to the nation. We could transform the speed with which we set up Nightingale hospitals. These are positive or negative, but you have to connect people to the why, because if they understand the why, then they'll care. And if they care, then they'll start doing new things. And once you connect them to why, then it's, well, how do I do that then? I want to be different. I want to spend more time. How do I do that? And then your job is to help them understand, how could I spend time with customers? How do I test and fail? Those kind of things.
Which is why exactly what, once you connect people, as Andrew's saying, to the why is, I believe the first book I wrote, I called it Anyone Can Do It, because I think these entrepreneurial qualities, a big myth around entrepreneurship and that startup thing is that certain people are sort of got startup characteristics. I don't think so. I think, everyone's got those characteristics. These are all qualities everyone's got. It's just that when you start a company, you tend to activate it. But I think now when you connect people with the purpose and the way the external world that we're all going to go back to pandemic, it's almost the same as you're in a startup environment. So it will actually activate the sort of all that empathy, resourcefulness that people have got already, that they kind of almost rise up to, which I genuinely believe. And you mentioned something, Chris, about a large company. I think, yes, it's a large company, but at the end of the day, frankly, in every large company, people work within small teams. So it's about not being too overwhelmed by, oh my God, we're 14,000 people. Actually, you're not, because everyone's divided into almost like a federal structure of smaller teams. And at the end of the day, we can only influence our own behavior, and culture is about our everyday behaviors. So if you as a leader of even a small team start changing how you behave, you change the people around you, and then slowly it sort of gathers. But really it just starts with one person's behaviors, I think.
Yeah. Making it personal, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
So obviously as an organisation, BT, we connect for good. We have this enormous purpose to connect the world. But for my own team, our own North Star, what drives us is about improving the culture and the experience for colleagues at smaller. So every team can create their own North Star, the thing that means something to them and makes it personal to them, and that can then drive behaviour in their space. But
and saying personal is
important.
very brave, in a corporate world, but that's what's changing. I mean, back then, I think my dad's generation, using the word personal, it wasn't safe. Everything had to be quite subjective. But saying personal is actually just showing what a huge kind of shift in dial it is for corporate cultures.
It's one of our corporate values.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. So great stuff. We've had a few questions from our audience, so we'll have a look at these. So the first one is a really good question from Steve, who asked about processes, actually. So outdated processes and doing things a certain way just because that's the way they've always been done is very frustrating, especially when trying to be agile. Do we have any top tips for how to deal with outdated processes? I think I'll go to the corporate person first. So, Andrew.
Well, I'm also actually a business process re-engineering consultant, which just shows you how old I am. But I think the answer to the process question is the same to the behaviour question, which is you need to know why. So, like anything we do, we should ask ourselves constantly. This is, I think, to your point about taking the time. Take the time to say, why do we do this from time to time? Excuse me. It's easier to go on doing the same thing we've always done, but if you take it every now and then the time, why do we do this? Is it making the difference we wanted it to? Is it working? Is that report that we've generated still being used? If it's not being used anymore, why are we doing it? So first thing you do is, why are we doing it? Then you say, is it working? Is it achieving that goal that we set ourselves? And that's very much a customer answer or a user answer, whichever one it is. And then it's about, well, what can we do differently? So what if we tried this? What if we did that? So that's where you get to experimentation. Let's look at different ways we can maybe achieve the same thing. Let's try not sending that report and see if anyone notices.
And what about getting rid of that report altogether, really, is what I say. So, a lot of companies I read about, especially the Silicon Valley, they have bureaucracy busters. It's kind of, get rid of bureaucracy. Every single week they make themselves get rid of a couple of stuff. And that also increases, I think, the goodwill in the company. You're talking a lot about people as well, Andrew. When people say, actually, that process was really cumbersome, we're going to get rid of it, it changes people's attitudes because people don't get into that passive, oh, I'm not going to bother because that process was there and they treat us like automatons. Whereas if you say, you know what, write in whatever process you want to get rid of it, and we're just going to get rid of it. And that's the only way to simplify is get rid of stuff. It's like weeds in your garden in a way.
Yeah, or pruning a rose.
Yeah.
Well, it sets a good precedent because then people are actively exploring the processes they can bust out. I mean,
and people respect, and you get the respect of the organisation because people can't complain and say they won't let me that process. People start becoming resentful, and that sort of inertia and hubris sets in when you do that, and the process becomes more important than the actual human beings that are complaining about it.
Very good. Very good. So we've got a second question from Julie on culture this time. So a shift in culture can't happen overnight. What are the first steps in coming up with a culture strategy that encourages simplicity in a large organisation? I'm going to go to Sahar first on this
God.
one.
Gosh, I mean, I'm definitely going to defer to Andrew because for me, I don't know what the word strategy means. All I think about in my very naive entrepreneurial way is just, change the way you behave every day. Take your values right back to the customer. As Jeff Bezos says, start from the customer and work backwards. And once you do that, you start changing how you behave because you're thinking all about the customer, and then slowly everyone else around you starts behaving. Now, that's not strategy. I'll move to Andrew, though. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, strategy. What a fun word that is. Strategies can be used at any level: personal strategies, team strategies, corporate strategies. So I think the answer is the same at all three levels. And I think it comes back to some of the things we talked about. So you need to start with the why. So that North Star. Why do we need to do something differently? And that's true for personal habit change in the same way it's true for large corporate transformation. So you start with the why. I think you then need this leadership piece. So whatever level of leadership or leader you are, you need to start demonstrating the behaviors you want to see. Because that's far more important than any messaging or email you might send or a speech you might give. So start demonstrating the kind of culture you want to see. If it's spend more time with customers, start spending more time with customers so people can see you are. If it's about taking risks, manage risks, but seeing what learns, then take some risks, explain how you've taken the risk, demonstrate how you've learned. So be clear on the why, demonstrate that through your leadership, your own personal behaviors. We can all do that, whatever role we play. And then the last one is a bit more strategic, which is make sure who you hire, make sure how you pay, make sure what you recognize and promote.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Sahar, Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank
That's
you.
been some really good advice for the people watching today. So a really fantastic masterclass on adopting an entrepreneurial mindset. And I have to say, I've learned a few tips myself, so thank you very much. Particularly how to shackle myself away from that legacy and embrace the new and not to let it restrain me. We've also learned how to follow our North Stars, being sure what good looks like and why it's so important to reinforce those messages. And I think crucially here, especially with the actions of our leaders. We've seen there's no cultural influence more powerful than the example set by others. And we've shown you that it's good to encourage the right behaviours and importantly to discourage those wrong behaviours. And they were, don't be too busy, so don't forget the connection with the customer. Don't be constrained, i.e. rely on how things have always been done. And finally, and I think really crucially, don't let fear be an option for you. Don't be afraid to try. And I think that's really, really sound advice. So I hope you've enjoyed today's masterclass. There are a few questions on the side of the screen that we would love you to take a few minutes to complete if you get a chance. And do please in the future keep an eye out for future Skills for Tomorrow masterclasses. So that's all today. Thank you for joining and hope to see you again soon.